Yeah, I'm absolutely delighted to be here with you today. I'm not going to speak very much. I've got a fantastic panel, and we're going to have a conversation about diversity, a very important conversation, as you said. So today, joining me, I have Dorothy Burwell. She's a partner at Finsbury, Glover, Herring. I've also got, I can't see him, hopefully he'll turn his camera on. I've got Emmanuel Ofosu-Appiah. He's a UK PR manager for Mercer. He's also a fellow board member on REEB, which is the Race and Ethnicity Equity Board. Sorry, bit of a mouthful. Sam Cooper-Gray, who's a bit of a diversity powerhouse, actually. I have had the pleasure of working with her at HSBC. She's co-chair of HSBC Balance, and she's also a board member of Women on the Wharf. Canary Wharf, for those who don't know. I also have Shalini Gupta. So Shalini is currently Leadership Communications at BT, but she was previously at NatWest. So that's an organisation I've worked at as well. And a member of the panel that you can't see, and I'm hoping that we don't hear very much from them today, is the man outside my window with an angle grinder. So I'm hoping that he manages to keep the noise down so he doesn't intrude on what is a very important conversation. So, okay, so due to recent events in many parts of the world, diversity and inclusion has been a huge topic of conversation this past year. It's also become more of an important part of the work that we're doing for clients and sometimes in our own organisations. And when we look at our own profession, we look at the PRCA's own census, it shows us that the industry is still very much predominantly white, public school and male, with very few disabled role models. So this is a really important that we keep this conversation going. I was a little bit concerned when I saw another PRCA survey. So there was one probably the back end of last year that said that 35% of people say that the momentum has fizzled out. So after the big events of last summer, and that 35% becomes 57% when we're actually talking to kind of Black, Asian and minority ethnic workers. So, as I said, if we really want to have change in this industry, we really do need to keep the conversation going. So our panelists today will share their views on this issue and broader aspects of diversity. We're going to take some questions in the Q&A function of the chat a bit later on. And my challenge is to keep this broad topic to just 20-25 minutes with just a few questions. So I'm going to kick off by asking our panelists really just the simple exam question. What does diversity mean to you? And I think I'm going to go to Shalini first for that one.
Hi everyone, and thank you so much for inviting me to this conference. And it's such an important topic to kick off with my views on. So I think diversity, as we know, is about representation. In the course of definition of the word diversity, it's about representation. But I think, in my perspective, there's a broader argument, to what diversity is and why it matters. And more specifically, because we know we're living in such complex times, in such a complex world, needing complex solutions, and in a state where not one sort of size fits all. I like to kind of give two lenses to my diversity sort of a definition. And I think it's the demographic aspects, of course, of diversity, where you're looking at the cultural background, the gender, the age, the race, religion, and the socioeconomic status. But I think secondly, the other important aspect is the cognitive aspect, which is the differences in our insights, our thoughts, our perspectives, our experiences. And I think true diversity really is when you bring the two together. What I'm saying is, and I don't think one discounts the other, but it simply sort of fills the gap that I don't think demography itself sort of, fulfills in isolation. And I think both can be considered very well if you think from a recruitment's perspective, by selecting, racially, ethnically, or gender diverse candidates. But at the same time, looking at how can we enhance diversity, sort of at two levels. You're having, candidates that have the professional skills, the background and the experiences that are relevant to organizations and of course, to their own roles. But at the same time, how are they presenting and bringing in the new perspectives and the new approaches to the sort of complex kind of problem solving scenario we're all finding ourselves in. And I think the end goal really is of diversity to maximize the positive aspects of the uniqueness we all bring in. But at the same time, I think it is to maximize that, but minimize tokenism. So it doesn't become just a number at the same time. And I think, it's really sort of from an organization perspective, like I said, the complexity of the world that we're living in, it's really sort of that brings us an understanding, a better understanding of, the varied customers, the varied communities and our colleagues, that our businesses serve, and be in a better position to do that.
There's some great insights, and actually we won't touch on it today, but certainly in our REEB conversations we talk about tokenism a fair bit, so thank you for that. If I can come to Dorothy now, so kind of your own perspectives on diversity, I'd be really interested to hear those.
Yeah, I agree a lot with what Shalini's just said in terms of it's not about having your organization look like a United Colors of Benetton ad. It's not simply making sure that you have every color under the sun represented, but what kind of environment are you creating? Diversity should be the happy results of getting other parts of the equation right. Do we have an environment where fairness runs paramount? Do we create a culture where everyone feels that when they come in the door, they are able to fully participate in the organization? Can I also be my unique self, or do I feel like I have to trend towards the center ground all the time? If we get all the pieces of the puzzle right, then you truly have people come into work and feel like they can be the individual that they are. They can contribute actually new ideas, and you no longer feel like you have to just blend in to the morass that is set out before you. You actually get new ideas, you get fresh energy in the room. And that's what diversity is. By bringing in different perspectives, we want other people to be able to see themselves in our organizations, not just see the organization as one big monolith.
I mean, that's fantastic. I mean, it's only very recently I found myself realizing that I've got to where I am by blending, and actually that's not what we want for the next generation. So thank you for that, Dorothy. That's really great. If I can come to Sam now. Sam, what's diversity to you?
Firstly, thank you for inviting me to join today. It's such a great panel to be a part of, so thank you. I think for me, I'd probably flip it on its head with inclusion. I would say diversity is the output of being inclusive. And actually diversity is a little bit for me about counting the numbers. As Dorothy said, trying not to be the United Colors of Benetton, but actually, diversity is who have you got there? Whereas inclusion is a behavioural cultural change. And for me, that's the piece that we're trying to work towards. So, what is important for me, I think, is that everybody has equality of opportunity, and that rather than us thinking that we have to take on difference and therefore people feel they've got to blend or there's tokenism, is trying to change the culture to recognizing there is real value in having different people from different socio-economic backgrounds, different ethnic backgrounds, different genders, different abilities. That actually adds value to business. And the thing that I find really interesting is the research already shows that the actual return on investment in companies that are more diverse is better. We know they make more money, they make better decisions. And so for me, it's about how do we take those black and white business facts and get the hearts and minds, especially from a senior and executive leadership point of view across all firms, where, let's be honest, what they do and what they say has a massive impact on the communities that we live in. So for me, that diversity piece is the output from us actually really genuinely embracing difference, because actually it's good for business. So that would
absolutely,
be my
Sam.
view.
Absolutely. And you've seen some PR disasters where you kind of look at it, you think, you don't have anyone diverse in that organisation, do you? Because if you did, you would not have made that. So Emmanuel, if I can come to you now, your views on diversity.
Yes, thank you very much, Anne-Marie. So yeah, I'm pretty much going to touch upon what everyone else has said already. But I think diversity, equity, and inclusion is about recognizing differences, understanding that everyone has a unique opinion, and everyone's opinion from a unique background should be considered. It's also about kind of trying to encourage equality in business as a whole. So, when I look back at my career and starting out in PR, I think when I started in 2012, I didn't see many people that looked like myself, and there's been a bit of a change, but there's still some way to go. And I think what we need to do now is just understand that, regardless of where you're coming from, you can add something to a business. So looking at my experience as well, going into organizations, just sitting around the table and being from a West African background sometimes can give you an upper hand in terms of how people can try to interpret certain situations that they're not familiar with. So I think, you know, if I wasn't around the table in certain situations, you know, my view probably would have just gone unheard. But the fact that I've been able to kind of get a seat at the table and come in from a different background, I think it gives people a chance to see a different perspective, especially in the PR industry where, you know, traditionally everybody looks pretty much the same. And, you know, that's not what we want in the future. We want to make it, you know, a lot more diverse. And, you know, it's down to us to kind of keep communicating and bashing this home to say, look, until there's a kind of level playing field, you know, we need to just keep talking about this issue. You know, and this is what platforms like this is all about, you know, just trying to share best practice and knowledge.
Yeah, and I know when we were speaking, Emmanuel, you when you said when you met me, you said I don't think you'd ever seen anyone really or got involved in REEB, kind of black women in the PR industry, and certainly I've had someone come up to me and say, "Oh, I didn't realize," and you know, so there's something about kind of being an open industry that's kind of welcoming. So I'll try not to give my age away now, but you know, some of the issues surrounding diversity in the city have been researched and talked about for decades. I mean, certainly my entire career within the city. And I've been around since those days where my boss told me, you know, not to wear trousers and to make sure I didn't wear flat shoes because, you know, the men like seeing my legs, which I'm sure that they wouldn't do now. But other than that, you know, has anything really changed? I'm going to come to Sam for this one. So, you know, why are we still talking about diversity kind of 20, 30 years later?
I think it's an excellent question, and I'll be honest, I had a similar experience with trouser wearing when I was very junior in the financial service industry. I was told by a female manager that I was not allowed to wear trousers in her office in an interview, and I challenged her, which was quite impressive given how young I was now on reflection. And she gave me the job, and the first thing I did when she gave me the job is I went out and bought a trouser suit because I'd never owned one in my life. But on principle, I was going to wear trousers to work for at least the first couple of weeks just to prove a point, which probably says more about me than anything else, and quite how stubborn I am. But I think you're right. I think, you know, do I think that would happen today? No. So do I think, and there's a lot of other experiences I've had in my banking career that hopefully wouldn't happen now. So I do think there has been progress. But I think a lot of that progress has been focused on gender rather than on broader diversity. And I think, you know, there's definitely been a benefit of that from women. If you look at the FTSE 100, the FTSE 250 boards around the world, you see a lot more women now in senior and executive leadership positions. And that helps with the looking up. When you look at the research, what a lot of people say is I need a role model. I need to be able to look up and see someone who is like me. Where the reason I think we're still talking about diversity is, you know, honestly, that has predominantly probably benefited women who look like me, right? You know, white, middle class, public school educated. Actually, I've probably really benefited from that. And I don't mean over and above my ability. I mean, I have benefited it from because it's something we've talked about a lot across industries in the last 20, 30 years, in a way the generation before hadn't. And the reason we're still talking about diversity and inclusion is because actually we're not doing it for everybody. And it goes back to my kind of piece at the beginning around inclusion is there's still so much to do to actually really benefit from inclusion, to take those business benefits from inclusion, which is significantly broader, especially when you look at ethnicity and you look up and what do you see. And actually, for me, something I'm really focused on at the moment is that socioeconomic background as well. How do you bring more people from different backgrounds into broader businesses? Because there's massive, massive value there in terms of reflecting the societies and the customers that we work with. So I think the reason we're still talking about it is because we haven't fixed it all yet, but we're definitely, I hope, in a better position than we were 20 years ago.
Yeah, thanks, Sam. I'm smiling now, thinking, goodness, how did they get away with it all those years ago? I think I'm probably going to come to Dorothy now for, you know, just additional perspective on that. Why are we still talking about this?
Yeah, you know, Sam is very right. You know, we have made progress in some areas, but not all. And I think the old adage goes, those who do not learn from history are doomed to repeat it. And so that very much applies to a lot of the diversity conversations. You know, you've said it spanned your entire career. It spanned my entire career for the last 20 years as well. And I know it's long before that. And you know, if we're honest, the root cause is unfortunately societal. It's not just the businesses woke up one day and decided to create institutionalized racism and sexism. So changing that takes every part of society doing their fair share in order to make strides. So not just settling for little wins and then falling into complacency because, oh, you know, I've got a woman on my board now, and I've got a person of color, so we're done, we're sorted. You know, and then you go get distracted by other issues because you're not making your numbers, or you're not, you know, your profit and loss statement isn't looking the way you want it to, and so that no longer is the issue of the day. We have to continuously sit back and look and say, it's not enough to just give people a seat at the table if other people can't even find the door. You need to continuously work on it and create different pathways that allow for progress at all levels of an organization.
That's great, thank you, thank you. Okay, so we're all sitting here today, kind of members of the panel, because in some ways we've all broken barriers. How important was it for you to have role models, and how have they made an impact on your career? I'm going to ask you that, Emmanuel.
Yeah, thank you, Anne. Yeah, so role models were very key for me starting out in the PR industry. So I was a graduate of the Taylor Bennett Foundation program, which was a charity that's been set up to get people from ethnic backgrounds into public relations and communications. So I did that in 2012. And luckily for me, I attended our annual kind of alumni summer party. And there was a guy called Lord Michael Hastings, who is former global head of citizenship at KPMG. And he was one of the patrons of the Taylor Bennett Foundation. And at this event, you know, he spoke, and I was really kind of just wowed by his presence. You know, the fact that he was a Black Lord as well, that kind of just blew me away. I couldn't believe like there was a Black man who was a Lord. So I was just like, wow, I've just really got to meet this guy. So after the event, I just approached him and I said, look, you know, I'm really inspired by, you know, what you've achieved and, you know, what you were talking about today. You know, could you potentially mentor me? And, you know, I didn't even know that he was in the House of Lords and all of this sort of stuff. And then the next day the next week he invited me to the House of Lords. And then he just told me about his career in public affairs, working at the BBC, just kind of really interested me about public relations and, you know, public affairs. And I said to myself, you know what, if he can achieve all of this in, you know, 60 years, you know, it's possible for me to do it. And he really made me believe in myself that, you know, regardless of wherever I've come from, you know, I can really make something of myself in terms of my career and where I want to be, you know. And for me right now, it feels like I've gone full circle, you know. At first I was thinking to myself, when would I ever get an opportunity to talk about my experience and how I had a role model to kind of get me to where I am, and look where I am today, you know. So for me, this is just an amazing opportunity. And I felt like if I didn't have that mentor initially to kind of give me that self-belief and make me understand that I can be someone, I probably wouldn't be here today, you know. So it's been very, very key for me in my career.
Yeah, that's great, and I'm a big fan of the Taylor Bennett Foundation. Actually, it was someone that we were sponsoring when I was at a different bank that came up to me. She said, "Oh, I didn't realise there were people like us in PR." So that, I mean, it's a fantastic organisation. So thanks for that, and I'm really quite envious that you know Lord Hastings. I don't know him, but maybe you'll introduce me a bit later on. Okay, so in bringing about change and gender equity and other inclusion issues actually in our profession, what is our responsibility as professional communicators? And I'm going to come to you, Shalini, for this one. I'm going to maybe come to Dorothy as well for this. But,
yeah,
Shalini.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, sure, absolutely. So I think as well as the responsibility, I think, you know, we're in an absolute unique position, you know, to influence, I think, you know, in this area. Anne-Marie, we hold the pen to so much of content, you know, that we write for the organization. And I think I'd just like to highlight 3 key areas where I think, you know, as well as responsibility, where we can create a real impact, you know. I mean, the first point is we've got a 360 view of the organization as communicators. You know, we have this umbrella view. And I think, you know, that's where it stands, where you can really tell and define a clear and authentic D&I story for the organization. It's not something, it's something beyond policies, statements, giving voice to the people, using our channels to drive a real discussion as to, you know, so what does D&I mean to the organization? You know, what has been done about it? And making it more relatable, I think, by bringing those people's stories to the fore. So that's one. The second, I think, is, you know, increasingly the role of internal communications is taking, you know, it's taking a wider role in terms of shaping employee experiences. And I think that's where the education piece comes in. It's about supporting people, supporting the people managers in the organization to, you know, coaching them on how to adopt, and the trainings, how to adopt that inclusive sort of attitudes and behaviors, you know, use of inclusive language within our communications. What are the best practices for, you know, what does that inclusive language look like? And as well as kind of, as communicators, looking at the non-verbal communication aspects of it, the collateral, the images, and everything else that we work on. Does it really reflect our colleagues? Does it reflect the communities? Does it reflect the customers we serve? So that's second, and I think lastly, and most importantly, it's using our strategic trusted advisor role as internal communicators, to work with our leaders and having those absolute courageous conversations and not being afraid of them and making sure that D&I is on the radar, it's on the agenda. And, and making sure that leaders are visible champions, they use their voice, to lend the gravitas and the much needed voice to the aspects of D&I. And we know that real progress takes time and it's really slow, but I think it's this consistent sort of ongoing effort by us as internal communicators, which can really have a powerful influence. So I think we have a really powerful role to play.
That's great, thank you, Shalini. I mean, is there anyone else that wants to come in on that? I think there are kind of three really great points. Dorothy.
Yeah. I think those are all great points on the internal side. If we look at the external side, though, I think we have a greater responsibility than most of us sometimes realize. We're the representatives of what is acceptable. We tell the world what leadership looks like. We say what's good and what great looks like. And so, in my work in particular, I work with clients who are going through life-defining moments. Often they have a crisis. They are going through a major strategic change or a transaction. If we don't have a firm grasp of what it means to recognize, leverage, and promote diversity across gender, across ethnicity, across disability, we are failing in helping these businesses and organizations position themselves on the right side of history. So we have a big responsibility in helping people do what they need to in order to develop and to grow and to create the conversation that we want to see in society. If we don't do that, then we become part of the problem and we fall into the disease of complacency ourselves.
Great insight. Thank you for that. Thank you. Definitely food for thought there. Okay, I can see some questions coming in. So just another couple of questions for the panel then. And I'm going to go to Sam for this one, I think. So we hear a lot about negotiation skills of women in the workplace, partly contributing to the pay gap. And we're not going to talk about the pay gap today because that's a whole other conference. But I just wanted to kind of get your kind of perspective and kind of any words of advice you've got on that.
Yeah, I suppose, and I can speak from personal experience, and I've got a very quick story to share, which I think people will find interesting. Personally, I remember as a more junior person going into stretch roles, great, because that helps for your career, and being told, because it's a stretch role, I can't give you a pay rise. And I remember reflecting when I was younger, thinking, okay, that's fair, it's a stretch role, I understand that. And then one of my male peers saying to me, don't be ridiculous, why haven't you asked for a pay rise? Like, I wouldn't take any job without a pay rise. And I was like, yeah, but it's a stretch role. And he's like, what's your point? And I was like, okay, I need to think about this. And so I got a bit braver. And I think as women, and this is a sweeping generalization, but generalizations are generally true, we're not great at kind of putting our head above the parapet and going, now you've offered me the job, I'm worth it. I'm actually going to be demanding that you actually value me from a financial perspective. And a friend of mine who works in another organisation told me a story about a senior leader who gave her a great piece of advice. And that was, she was going into a new big role and she got offered a package, and she looked her senior exec manager in the eye and said, can you look me in the eye and tell me that I'm paid on a par with my male peers? And this guy kind of went, I have no idea. And she said, well, I'll tell you what, go away, check it, come back to me and give me an offer that puts me in line with my male peers. And he went away, he came back and he gave her an increased offer. And that story was a real learn for me, which is, I think, as women, is to really value ourselves and actually, be fairly demanding. We're worth it. If someone's offered you a job, then you've got nothing to lose by asking for it. There is a win-win in there for everybody. So I think there is definitely an opportunity for us to kind of own it when it comes to moving roles and negotiating our pay. So that was my little light bulb moment.
I'm so going to use that. And in fact, all the women that I mentor, I'm just going to tell them to do that. I may have to take 10% and make me a very wealthy woman, but that's such a great tip. Thank you, Sam. So final question now, and I'm going to come to all of you in turn, really. So we're a few days away from International Women's Day on the 8th of March. And the theme this year is choose to challenge. So we can all choose to challenge and call out gender bias and inequality. And we can all choose to seek out and celebrate women's achievements. So I'm going to come to each of the panel in turn, and as you've got the mic, Sam, what are you going to choose to challenge?
Okay.
Oh, have you thought about that yet?
Yeah, no, I have. So my choose to challenge is I'm challenging myself as opposed to others. In my day job, I look after business banking customers for HSBC around the world, and we do a lot internally in my role as the co-chair for Balance globally, which is our gender network. But actually, my choose to challenge is, how do I help underserved minority groups in our customer base and our potential customer base, so the entrepreneurs of the future? How do I help them to get access? So that's my personal challenge for the year.
Thank you, Sam. And Shalini, have you thought about your choose to challenge?
Yeah, absolutely. And this kind of actually picks up from what Sam was talking about earlier in terms of negotiation and, pay rise and everything. Because I think, the gender sort of confidence gap issue, I think it's contentious, but at the same time, I think it's just so very real. And I think it's because of lack of visible and confident role models, and more so even, Anne-Marie, for, women of color. And I think a lot of it stems from the fact that historically we've just rewarded overconfidence over real competence, I think. So I think my challenge is really kind of, in my sort of PR network, there are some, young girls who I mentor, and also, my network is really supporting and encouraging those voices, those underrepresented voices, to kind of really sort of overcome the self-doubt and speak more confidently about their achievements, their accomplishments, just be more visible. Because I think what we're doing is, by creating that visibility, is sort of inspiring the next generation of those women coming out of the system. And what you see is what you become, really, isn't it?
Brilliant. Thank you. Thank you so much for that. Emmanuel, so you can choose to challenge as well, International Women's Day. Have you thought about what you're going to choose to challenge?
Yeah, so does it have to relate solely to women, or can it just be more general?
You can choose to challenge whatever you like.
Yeah, so for me, I think I'll choose to challenge just HR departments and businesses in terms of, when they're hiring people at the junior level. From when I look back to when I was starting, a lot of people got jobs based on who they knew, and connections of dads, friends, or they used to play golf with someone else's dad and then they got the job. Whereas people like me, we didn't have those connections. So for me, I'm choosing to challenge, the HR departments and businesses to say, look, don't give people jobs based on who their dad knows or who their dad's dad knows. Give the job based on the person's skill set and their ability. And, look at the person's career in 10 years' time to say, okay, where could this person be if we gave them a chance? So that's one thing I would choose to challenge, yeah, that would be my main point on that topic.
Yeah, brilliant. And I think when the pubs reopen again, we should have a longer chat on, it's not what you know, it's who you know, because there's so many examples of that. Thank you, Emmanuel. Dorothy, what are you going to choose to challenge?
I think I'm going to choose to challenge both complacency and performative allyship. Warm words are not enough, despite us being communicators. If you support women, if you support any underrepresented group, what actions are you tangibly taking, and how far are you willing to go until you actually achieve equality? It's not enough just to tick a box.
That is, yeah, absolutely fantastic. Absolutely fantastic. Thank you for that. And I guess I suppose I have to choose to challenge as well. Yeah, I am going to challenge kind of language. I think I've seen a few examples this past week where the excuse of, oh, he's from a different generation, or or his agency is really successful, or I worked for him before and he's a good guy, so like let's give him a pass on that kind of racism, sexism, and I think in this case it was homophobia as well. So I'm definitely gonna not be tolerating that or standing by and watching that. I shall challenge that. So we've got I think we've got a couple of minutes, haven't we, Fiona, to take I've seen a couple of questions come through the Q&A. And actually, this is one.
I ask you, Anne-Marie, if you wouldn't mind, there was certainly one in the, I'm not sure if this is the one you're coming to in the Q&A, around small regional agencies and how they have struggled to find more diverse candidates So that's a plea for help. Where should they go? Where to look?
Yes, I think the answer to that question is we've gone down the route of recruitment agencies in the past, but have not been successful. Any recommendation? I mean, I'm so tired of hearing that there isn't a talent pipeline. I mean, there's a huge talent pipeline out there, but I'm not going to answer that question. I mean, Emmanuel, I think your Choose to Challenge was around HR departments. So do you want to give some advice around how we recruit and attract more talent?
That's a tough one, especially right now in the remote world. But what I do remember from being in university, I went to university in Manchester, and we had a lot of careers days where people would come in and speak, not to people on my course, but to the actual societies. So we had our African Caribbean Society, and people from loads of different organizations would come in and speak to our African Caribbean Society. And that kind of gave us an exposure to top organizations and firms, rather than just actually being online and searching for these jobs. So it was great that, these organizations were really willing to come out, as far as Manchester, to look for talent that is diverse. That's probably a strategy that could be kind of replicated across other universities, kind of contacting their African Caribbean societies and other ethnic diverse groups via the university. I think that would be a good way to kind of reach that kind of target market.
Great, thank you. Does anyone else want to come in on that? What advice they would give?
It's Sam here. So I think the thing as well is there's lots of associations out there that can give you access. So, in London we have We Are the City, which focuses on gender. There's Forward Ladies, which is nationwide, Northern Power Women. So I think there are lots of organisations, voluntary organisations who care passionately about this topic, who would very happily share the opportunities that people have got to get them out there to people who may not see them in the mainstream. So I think across both ethnicity and gender, there are so many organisations and groups of people just wanting to do good with fantastic networks of people attached to them, that the opportunity is huge. Gender Networks is another one, the network of networks, where you bring people who lead networks together. And so I think it's about thinking a bit differently about how you approach it, and maybe going specifically to those organisations who are designed to support, and that therefore by definition can have access to people you may not have, and that recruitment agencies may not have.
Absolutely, thank you. And I would probably just add another couple of things on there. So there's the obvious of saying to the recruitment agency, I do not want to see a slate unless it's diverse. I do not want to see it because there's absolutely no excuse for it, that the talent is absolutely out there. And then I'd also look at the language that you're using in some of your adverts. So I know I do interim work, so I read a lot of job adverts, and I often see needs to be degree qualified. I'm like, why? Needs to have done this. I'm like, why? Because I think some of these must-haves that appear in job descriptions are actually quite exclusive. So I think between them, making sure that, doing some of the great stuff that Sam and Emmanuel have talked about, so, to kind of broaden your reach, looking at the language and actually saying to the agencies, don't bring me a slate that all looks the same. I think that those are a couple of things that you could do.